Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? Very good episode today. This is Jay Blakeson. If you don't know who Jay is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Harrogate, North Yorkshire, filmmaker Jay Blakeson started out making low-budget shorts of his own. This eventually led to him being able to make a slightly larger film, The Disappearance of Alice Creed, in 2009, starring Gemma Arterton and Eddie Marsan. Over the next 14 years, Jay wrote and directed many other films and TV shows. Some highlights include the Gunpowder miniseries for BBC One/HBO, and 2021's I Care a Lot, for which Rosamund Pike won a Golden Globe. Most recently, Jay wrote and directed the Disney Plus series Culprits, which just debuted last week, and it is wonderful. Highly recommended, folks. Start watching it now. I think all 8 episodes are up. I'm a handful of episodes in, it's just delightful. There are 2 things, and I don't know if it's cultural or what, but 2 things that folks in the UK do better than most other countries. One of them is silly comedies. You know, Toast of London, Look Around You, Spaced, Alan Partridge, etc. The second one, crime dramas. Broadchurch, Happy Valley, Marcella, etc., etc., etc. And when I'm relaxing in the evening, and I'm trying to forget about the dystopia around me, I really need a good British crime drama. And there hasn't been one lately. I've just been trying to get by on Night Court reruns on Freevee. Yeah, I don't know what it is about a good British crime drama that just fulfills something in me. You know, maybe it's the need to escape the United States and it's the quickly collapsing culture around me. Maybe it's the need to watch a show that actually can draw me in and make me emotionally invested. But that's what the best British crime dramas do, and what, in fact, Culprits does to me. And yeah, I really like Jay's writing. It looks great. It's gripping. Highly recommended, folks. And Jay was just an absolute peach to talk to. Really loved chatting with him. It's one of those ones where I kind of walk away and I'm like, I think we could be friends. We had a lot of the same films, a lot of the same music in common. I don't know. Jay, let's do lunch. By the way, folks, if this is your first episode of Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. What I like to do here in the intro is a little recommended if you like. I've been doing the show for 14 years. I've talked to hundreds of writers and directors and filmmakers and musicians and artists. So, that's a lot of interviews to dig through. So, you know what? If you're here because you like Jay, because you like hearing talks with filmmakers or showrunners, or, why don't I just say, how about these are writers and folks from the UK? Let's just do that. How about here's some recommended if you like. If you like Jay, if you like this talk. Why, I've talked with John Ronson, I've talked with Aisling Bea, Josie Long, Will Sharp, Arthur Matthews, Robert Popper. So check out those episodes. If you like what you hear, why not subscribe to the show? Why not leave a review? Also, you can follow me on social media. I mean, Twitter. Is it even worth it? But I guess I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram if you want to see pictures of my pets and my wife. That's all at Andy Beckerman. Coming up, a lot of amazing episodes. Jonathan Lethem, one of my favorite writers. Evan Dando from the Lemonheads. Tanya Donnelly of Belly and the Breeders. Arnold Drayblatt. Wonderful 20th century, 21st century modern composer. So stay tuned for those episodes. But for now, let's talk to Jay. Absolutely off topic of what I talk about on the show. But just because I was watching Culprits last night, I was wondering in the very beginning, you know how you have that crane shot in on that driver's mansion? Mm-hmm. As someone who has been working in this business for a while, but because of the way it works in the United States where you don't actually get any experience to be on set anymore as a writer, or it's starting to, like, after this writer strike, it's getting a little better, or fingers crossed. We'll see what happens in the new year. I have a question. When you have that, when you write that, because you wrote this too, right?
Yeah.
Did you write that originally into the script? Did you envision it? And then, or is it like when you started storyboarding it, you're like, all right, we're going to do this?
I believe I wrote it as like a aerial shot. Yeah, so an aerial shot across vineyards on a mountain to see like this luxurious villa. And then we used a drone on the day. It wasn't a crane, so we did a drone shot. So the drone shot, you can kind of swoop and then go up, and then we got a little walkie-talkie. So I'm by a monitor and I'm cueing the guy who's waiting to run. So we're at exactly the point we need to be, and I'm like, go, 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 and he starts running. And then I've got the drone guy next to me, and I'm like, slow down, slow down. So
okay. Now, when you're budgeting this stuff, are you like, I have this idea. I guess a drone is less expensive than a crane. Again, I'm going to say this is not what we're talking about on the show, but because it's in my head, I felt compelled to ask you about it. Do you go to the line producer? You're like, hey, we want to do this shot. Can we afford it? Or is that where we're doing this kind of action-y thriller? It's just part and parcel of it. Because I don't write anything. I write to this budget. I came out of sketch comedy in New York. So I have a $20 budget in my head. And I'm like, all right, every scene is people talking.
Well, I came from that as well. I came from like zero budget short films that I did myself. And my first feature was kind of from that. But no, what you do is you just write it in. And then when you're sitting down, I sit down with my DOP, and then we go through it, and I say, look, I'm going to need some drone shots. And then so like, okay, so that we shot that in Spain. So we got a Spanish drone unit, and then we thought, okay, how many days do we need them for when we're in Spain? So we're going to need them that day, but maybe on that day we can go and get other bits as well. We can send that drone around the area, so to get some sort of establishing shots of countryside, which we did as well. And then we got them another day. So there's some shots in episode 4 where there's cars driving around the road, which is set in the south of France, but actually that's also Spain. And so that is also a drone following cars around. So you basically know you're going to need drones. So we use drones in Canada, we use drones in Spain, we use drones in Norway, and we use drones in London and in Manchester. So, and then you just, I say, I'll need it for 4 days, and they go, no, you can have it for 3 days. And I'm like, okay, so I'll cut these shots out, and maybe we can double up this and that. And when we're in Norway, we managed to get drone shots because we could only take a very skeleton crew out there. The sound guy, who was boom operator and sound recordist, was also a drone operator. So we could double him up, so he could do 2 jobs when he was there.
Okay, so coming out of I guess a similar background, I was reading, there wasn't a lot about your childhood, your parents online, but I think I read an interview where you said, you didn't really come from money or anything like that. You kind of learned how to do this, making your own films, like starting off, making your own films. So, what's in your mind mentally? What's the ramp like when you do these kinds of things, right? Obviously there are intermediary steps you've had in between, but does it come naturally? Like, at what point do you internalize this stuff? That's the thing that I'm really interested in, is what point does it become kind of just like second nature to you to, like, yes, think in this certain way, as opposed to thinking in like, I've got $20.
Yeah, I was always, my problem breaking through was I was always writing like I had more money than I was ever going to get. So it was always trying to fit as much into the box I was given as humanly possible. So, the thing that ends up happening is my stuff looks a bit more expensive than it really is, which is a good skill to have, but then everybody wants you to use that skill, so nobody wants to give you enough money to actually make the stuff you really want. But yeah, like with everything, it's like with writing, at first you sort of have to learn how stuff works, and then it becomes instinctive, and then you learn new things, and then they become instinctive. I think the thing that was for me was the hardest was the jump from my first film to my second film, because my first film was under $1 million, and then my second film was like over $40 million in budget, and that we went from like 3 actors in a room to sort of like a big VFX movie. And so that was a very different thing, and I had to learn a lot. I'd never worked with stunts. I'd never done like helicopter shots. I'd never done big VFX shots. So all of that was a steep learning curve. And you just, this thing is still the same. Like with writing, it's still you're writing characters and you're writing story, and it doesn't matter what the story, what the characters, and what the budget. The thing is still the same. And with directing, it's the same thing. It's like you just got to tell people what you want and hire good people to help you achieve it. The key is knowing what you want. I think on both of them is knowing what you want. Because if it's very hard for people, to work in a vacuum. If you've got a great stunt coordinator and it just says on the page they fight, and he goes, well, what kind of fight do you want? And so you've got to know what fight you want. I mean, sometimes I'll say, well, I don't know, workshop something, when I didn't know what the hell I was talking about, and then they would workshop something, and I'm like, no, not that, because it's too flashy and it looks like they're both ninjas. It needs to be messy and it needs to be interesting. So sometimes it's trial and error, but most of the time, if you just sit and talk and you've got references, and I've seen millions of movies, so I've always got a reference that I can point to, and I can pull a clip, or I can sort of show a photo. Most of these books behind me are photography books, and I can find an image that feels like what I want something to feel like, or has a vibe to it. Then you can go into that, and it's just directing is mostly just telling people what you want over and over and over again.
But I guess what I'm trying to get is you've always thought like that. This is not it's not like, oh, now I have Disney money behind me, I can do the thing I want to do. I can now start to think in a new way. I always thought in this way, and now I have a budget that can help me realize physically some of the ways it can go. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think so. I think when I was writing, you have the freedom of anything, right? The problem with the writing is reining in. It's not getting bigger. That like my first scripts. A lot of my scripts didn't get made because they were too big. You know what I mean? So what I had to learn was to make it small enough that I could achieve it. And the reason I got my first film made, I think, The Disappearance of Alice Creed, is that I'd written that based on the fact that if no one was going to finance it, I could make it myself for like £100,000, because I could shoot it in my own apartment. I had some friends who could be in it. I mean, the whole thing is sort of written to be cheap. Like they strip out all the furniture, they strip out all the decorations, they border up the windows, so you can shoot for day or night. It's like it was all based on practical things that I learned were a nightmare when we were shooting short films. So it's like we could shoot on wasteland. I didn't want many extras anywhere. I could probably buy a van off eBay. So it's just the two locations were essentially a van and the interior of an apartment and 3 people. And the whole of the action was just like using very minimal props, minimal costumes, because I just knew that if I had to sort of shoot this at weekends for 2 years, I wouldn't want like loads and loads and loads of costumes that I could lose, or we'd have to get replacements for. So I could just get like 4 of each. They're just wearing sort of like coveralls. I could just like buy 4 of those for each actor, and like they're all wearing things over their head for most of the film. Like wearing ski masks, and she has a bag over her head. So if I couldn't have an actor for a day, I could use like a double with a thing on their head, or that sort of thing. It was all that was the thing that was more like a puzzle of how can I make something that feels like a big movie for a very, very, very small amount of money? In the end, I made it not for 100, but for like 700-800 thousand, and it was.
Sorry, I thought you were about to say 700 or 800 euro, and I'm just like, well, that's interesting.
That would be great. No, so it was made for 100 grand, and we made it for like I think about 800 in the end, because we got a bit more money for music, but it was very cheap. It was a tiny crew, but for me, I'd be making these films with 5 people, where I was, a lot of the time I was operating the camera, or we had no assistant director team or anything like that. It was me, a cinematographer, a gaffer, and the actors essentially, and some people helping out. And we'd get permits, and that's all. The money was spent on insurance and permits and rentals. And nothing else. I would spend the whole day before making food to feed people on, for the shoot day and things like that. And so, that was really great. But that's how I assumed it was always going to be. So when I had a crew of about 25 people and like great actors like Eddie Malzahn and Mike Compton and Gemma Arterton, for me, it felt like I was making, I don't know, like a David Lean movie. It felt huge. So, I was really happy that that, even though everybody else on that crew was like, God, this is the smallest, shortest shoot we've ever been on. For me, it was like, no, this is amazing. It's like we built a set. I'm not shooting this at home. So if I'd gone straight from shooting stuff on my own to making culprits, I think I would have, had to learn a lot more, because it was like I wouldn't know any of the politics, any of the system, any of how it works, how budgeting works, how the just scheduling works and all that. But you quickly learn, because it's kind of it's the same every day.
Yeah, it's more of the expansive imagination, letting your imagination just go in a certain way that is just, I think, a little foreign to me. And I'm wondering, well, I don't know. I don't know how old you are, but you definitely grew up at the least in the wake of Thatcher's England. And you're from Northern England, right?
I am from Northern England, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious as to, well, let's just talk about that for a little bit, right? Harrogate. Sure. What is Harrogate? I'm guessing you're late 80s, early 90s. You're a kid, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That is a ballpark correct, yeah. So Harrogate is it's quite a big town, which is outside a city called Leeds. And Harrogate is, I guess, sort of in the middle of Yorkshire, which is kind of quite working class and quite industrial. Harrogate was historically kind of like a tourist town for Victorians. It was a spa town, so it was sort of had a lot of money in Victorian times, and so it's very green, and it's got a lot of tea rooms. Has a lot of really lovely sort of architecture, and I grew up there. There was a really good theatre there and things like that. So it was quite a middle class place, in sort of surrounded by working class towns. But it had nice bits of it and it had rougher bits of it. I was sort of straddling the two. I mean, I went to what we call state school here, which is not private, just like normal school, my normal local school. And I just had a very, very normal childhood in this northern town. And I went to the theatre because my parents like the theatre and they like movies. And so I'd go to the cinema a lot, go to the theatre a lot, and just, really loved all that and sort of fell in love with all that sort of stuff while being in Yorkshire. And then luckily found a few friends who either would indulge me while I was making stuff on video cameras, or they would, watch movies with me, and they would watch the sort of the more entertaining ones like Alien and Blade Runner, but not, Kozlowski Three Colors trilogy, things like that. I would go, but then I would go see the Kozlowski films with my mum. She she introduced me to Kozlowski films and, sort of 1940s films and Paolo Pressburger and stuff like that. She really liked afternoon matinee films on the TV that we'd watch together. So, I was sort of steeped in just a very normal cinema. And at the time, in this sort of the late 80s, early 90s, I'm sort of not old enough to have seen Star Wars movies in the theater, but that's sort of the wave of Star Wars on video and the raid in the Indiana Jones films and things like the Goonies. That there was this sort of kids really loved movies. I saw Back to the Future in the theaters, saw Ghostbusters in the theaters when I was too young, really. Yeah. And then so it was things like that people liked. It's not like now where it's people do go to the movies, but you can stay home and watch stuff. There was nothing on TV. I didn't have a video recorder for until I was, I don't know, 11, 12. So it was what you had to watch what was on TV, or you had to go to the cinema. And so we go to the cinema every week, and it was cheap. I could go to, it wasn't like now, it was £1.50 or something to go to, as a kid's ticket to go to the cinema in the afternoon. And so me and my friends would go see whatever was on, just anything. We'd go and see Steven Spielberg's Always when we were 12, things like that. We go see anything. And I just loved that. I sort of fell in love from just the sheer volume of and I read a lot, and my brother liked comics and music, and I still like music, as you can see. That I just was really into sort of I guess they would call it consuming content now, but there wasn't a lot of content to have. There was just TV.
You don't have to call it content. We can call it what it is, which is music and films and meaningful
art,
stuff.
Culture. And I liked art. I like looking through art books, and I liked drawing and painting, and I like sports too, but I was just terrible at them. But I tried. But I just sitting at home was boring. There was nothing to do at home. There was nothing to watch nothing. There was no screens to watch. We
Yeah.
had a Commodore 64, which even then was out of date. And so playing like Judge Dredd on Commodore 64, which was a terrible game, over and over. So apologies to the people who made Judge Dredd for Commodore 64, but yeah,
No, don't
alien.
apologize. Don't apologize to them.
Had good music. I remember the music being great. Uh, but all of that stuff, it goes in and it sort of lodges in there, and then that sort of stews. And after a while, you're like, I want to do something myself. I used to make little things, used to try and be in plays at the theater as a kid, and just wanted to be a part of it. Yes.
Okay, there's a lot there. The first thing that I thought of was, it seems like, I was imagining you like trying to play Decalogue for your friends, and they're just like, what is this? Because when I was younger, my friends revoked my privileges of choosing what movie to watch because I chose too many indie films, and they're like, we don't want this. We want to watch Alien 3 or whatever, right? Which I want to see too, but I also want to see whatever, there was in the early 90s or mid 90s, there was a big, indie, at least in America, like I was about to say resurgence, but not the actual surgence of indie films. So I'm like, hey, let's watch this Jim Jarmusch film. And everyone's like, no, we want to watch Terminator 2. Again, a fine film, no problem with it. But I had my privileges revoked after a while. And when it was, my turn to choose. So I'm imagining that for you as the same.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I never tried. I mean, for me, that was always the private joy. Was I was into those movies in much the same way that, when you got like weird music taste, I'm not going to try and get my, pop music loving friends into like the Boredoms or something. You know what I mean? I'm going to sort of try.
I tried. Well, that's the thing.
You're more of an evangelist, obviously. I was like, this is mine. This is my secret stash. And also because I was like, I used to love one of my favorite films when I was a kid was the Michael Redgrave version of The Importance of Being Earnest. You know what I mean? I used to love that movie. At the same time, I loved Back to the Future. I mean, for me, It's always been, I've always loved everything, and I sort of weird classical music at the same time as loving, good pop music, as well as like you, I was really into kind of that wave of independent movies, which we didn't really get in the UK. We had little bits of it, but we had like social realism in the UK, and we kind of got Danny Boyle a bit later. But obviously in '92 Reservoir Dogs came out, and I was like a young teenager. And I remember my brother was at university at that point, and he reviewed it and for the student paper, and he said you got to see this movie, you're gonna love this movie, because it was very much the kind of thing that I liked. And I remember seeing that, and it was kind of amazing. And then obviously Pulp Fiction a few years later, and that was amazing. But they actually came to my town. They played in the cinema in my town. But in between all of that, I was watching Jim Jarmusch movies. I remember watching, it was Down by Law was the one that I fell in love with. I'd seen Mystery Train, quite liked it, then watched Down by Law, absolutely loved that. And then started, I remember taping Permanent Vacation off and it was on satellite TV at some point when and I didn't have satellite TV, so I got a friend at school to tape it for me. Got his mum to tape it for me at like 2:00 in the morning, so I could, because it wasn't available commercially anyway. So it's the only time I could have seen it. And then, me and a friend of mine would sort of drive to the nearest big city where there was like a bigger video store, which wasn't like a Blockbuster. And then we would like save all the pocket money up, and then we would buy like, I don't know, like Cinema Deluxe stuff like Diva and I remember, and I would scour the back of magazines where there'd be reviews of all the VHS releases. And I remember a big moment for me was I read a review of the VHS release, the UK VHS release of Three Shorts by Hal Hartley, and it gave it a great review. And this is in the back of Deadline magazine, which was like the magazine that Jamie Hewlett, who drew Tank Girl, that's the magazine that he used to draw for. And so I read this review, and it kind of gave it a good review, and it sounded just like my cup of tea. So I sent off of that, and it was so expensive. I think it was like £20 for a VHS, which now would be like £50, like for how much 20 quid was worth. And then when it arrived, I remember watching that, and then that started with Surviving Desire. And it was the first Hal Hartley I'd seen, and I just loved it. I thought I watched like immediately again and again, and I just loved that. And I thought I want to make that. I want to make that. And also I want my life to be that. I want to be sort of I want to be an obsessive Dostoevsky professor who had like ennui and like. has this love affair because and like, but like that film and Tarantino film and Jarmusch's films were sort of like little, and obviously I'd watched a lot of Scorsese because that would come up on TV, and at the time there's a lot of new queer cinema which was really exciting, but that would come nowhere near us. I had to wait for that to come on TV onto DVD. So I really got into like Greg Araki, and got into Gus Van Sant, especially Drugstore Cowboy and Mine Private Idaho, and sort of all these films just seemed so exciting, and like compared to what was going on in the UK at the time, which was sort of, I can't even remember what was going on in 1992. But it was not interesting to me. It was like Remains of the Day, that sort of thing, which is a really good film. But as a teenager, you're not rushing to movies to see that. Or it was sort of Ken Loach movies or Mike Leigh. So I was really excited by that. And at the same time, there was like the UK music scene was exploding, like the post-rave scene was exploding. Like pre-Britpop sort of music was getting really exciting, and then music was getting really exciting in America. I mean, I got Pavement there, but like I was really into Pavement, really into like Sebadone. Obviously, Nirvana was coming around, so there was just so much like young, new, independent, like people doing it for themselves. And like after the very shiny, very commercial 80s, it really felt like something like Clark's was real, and El Mariachi was really inspirational. So there's people doing it for themselves, not asking permission, doing it cheap. And so that's how I imagined I was going to do it, because it's like I was up in Yorkshire where there was no film industry. There's more film industry in Yorkshire now, but there was no film industry when I was there. And I mean, my dad was a writer, so I kind of understood that was a job, and he could do it. But he wrote. We started off writing radio plays. That when I was a kid, he was writing radio plays and won awards for them. And he eventually wrote for a soap opera, which was really not what I was interested in doing at all. But I felt like I could go stand next to people with cameras now and again and look at it, which I didn't do that very, very often, to be honest. He didn't take me along very often. But when I was drawing pictures, they were often on the backs of some of his scripts. So it was sort of around, but it wasn't really sort of being indoctrinated in me. But I was lucky because I knew it was a job, whereas I know other people, it took them a bit longer to understand that this is a career, this is a profession, this is something that normal people do, not just people over there, in Hollywood. So it was an exciting time, with all that culture happening, that I just really want to be a part of it. Sounds pretty similar to your feeling of like you just see this new stuff and it just felt so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, Hal Hartley, Henry Fool was kind of like a ground zero for me, where I'm like, oh, like something changed in me when I saw that. So wait, your dad, did he write radio plays for BBC?
So he wrote radio plays for Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, and he won like the Sony Radio Award for one of them, and he won a thing called the Giles Cooper Award. So he was like, but they don't pay very well, writing radio plays. So we were quite, I don't know, sort of bohemian, I guess, that, my dad was kind of a struggling artist, and then doing other things at the same time, mostly writing. But then he'd write on some TV things now and again. And then when I was a teenager, he got a job on this show called Coronation Street, which was one of the most popular TV shows at the time. And suddenly our lives changed, that we went from, getting okay Christmas presents to, oh yeah, wow, pretty good Christmas presents.
Ooh, N64.
So, yeah, well, I don't know. We never got a better computer than that.
So wait, did you move to London then? Like, I didn't know that you could work in entertainment from anywhere else from than a major city, like for here, New York or LA. And I just assumed like if you weren't in London, you couldn't do this stuff. I
mean, Coronation Street was based in Manchester, which is in the north of England, not where we lived, but it was like a less than 2 hour car drive. It's like kind of living in Pasadena and working in sort of Santa Monica, I guess. Like you can do it, but the way the writing the show like that works is that they do kind of a couple of days of like writers' room story conferences and decide some of the big stuff. And they do that like I don't know what it's like now, but they do it every so often. And then most of the rest of the time you're at home writing, so writing the great thing about writing is you can kind of do it from anywhere, especially now with Zoom. You on Culprits, I only met the writers who wrote it after we edited it, because we did our room in COVID. And so everybody was on Zoom, and I didn't actually meet any of the writers for real until I took them all out for dinner once I had time to do so. But so I think now you can write from anywhere. I mean, I know people who do writers' rooms in the UK who live in Australia, and they just stay up at night and do the writers' rooms in the night, and then they do the scripts and hand it in. It's a job you can do remotely. Now, I mean, directing is not. I mean, sure. You can, people do, but it's almost impossible. It's like you're not doing the same job then. You're doing sort of air traffic controlling rather than directing. But no, so he was living in Yorkshire and working from there.
Okay, this is good to know, by the way, because my wife and I are thinking of fleeing the U.S., especially if the Christian fascists take over, which is possible.
And it's possible everywhere in the world. It's not just the US that is problematic.
Well, we're looking at places where maybe New Zealand is safe. We don't know. But we're like, how do we do our jobs from there? Okay, that's possible. But because all the writers' rooms here are mostly in person now, and so it's just like, ooh. But
they're nicer in person. But I would say this: if you're a good writer and they want you, and you're good in a room, even on a Zoom room, and you deliver the goods, you can people will make allowances for you, and like and they should, and because most of our industry isn't very accessible. That if you're a disabled writer, it's very difficult, to be on set, and often to be like work in studios, because you're kind of like, the writer's room is most of the time pretty inaccessible, because especially over here, it's like cheap places that are above, somewhere that you'll be very lucky if you get somewhere accessible. The great thing about remote working is it is accessible to everybody. Though I really like working in person much more than working on Zoom. It's less exhausting, it's more fun, and I think that on virtual stuff you miss those cues, those sort of body language cues that you don't realize are happening, like people trying to catch your eye, and just you can tell somebody's not spoken for a long time and they're sort of zoning out. You got to bring them back in. It's like trying to conduct an orchestra from a distance. It's quite hard.
I like the challenge. I don't know if you've noticed, Jay, but I'm pretty wonderful on Zoom. So
you seem very comfortable.
Wait, how did your dad originally get started writing professionally?
I mean, he wanted to. I think he won a competition. He entered competitions and then he won one. But he didn't get his first professional writing job until deep in his 30s. And he was working as a teacher before that. I mean, my dad was grew up exceptionally working class, and then just, worked his way out. He's smart, and he, became a teacher, and then he became a local radio presenter and he started writing for local radio while he was presenting, because there was this big boom of local radio that happened in the UK, because it used to be just the BBC, and then suddenly independent little local radio stations all came out at the same time in in the 60s and 70s, and they needed loads of people to run them suddenly, so they had to hire loads of people who hadn't done it before, and my dad was one of those people who talked his way into a job. And then, as I say, he did some writing there. He wrote some weird shows for kids on that, and then he just kept on entering competitions, like playwriting competitions, and then eventually he placed in one, and then he won another one, and then he got his first commission. It's like everything. It starts like baby steps, and then you get a bit of a break, and then steps get bigger, and then you get another break, and suddenly you're an overnight success after 15, 20 years of trying,
Yeah. It's interesting, going back to some stuff you said before that I want to touch on. A big theme on this show is just that certain physical properties of you, the guest, whoever, me, right, just push you in a certain direction. There are all these certain little nudges I think you get, and one of them is just physical shape. I'm smaller than a lot of people, so I like playing sports, but I was never going to be unless I dedicated myself. Obviously, there are short people who are very good at whatever they play. Basketball, there's a handful of short basketball players, but they dedicate their life to doing that, which is not something I felt like doing. And I think it's interesting. You said, I like sports, but I was never going to be. And I'm curious, Did that just nudge you in a certain direction? Was it ever like, well, you know what? I could, if I really wanted to dedicate myself to sports, or was it just the physical space you take up? You're just like, I'm never going to be, I'm never going to be a footballer. So I'm never.
I mean, I think it was just like an absolutely obvious lack of talent. And I had some friends who were very talented. A friend of mine was a very good cricketer, very good rugby player, played professional rugby. Eventually, that was his career. And he played for England a couple of times. But he was like in my primary school football team as the goalkeeper, and he was just amazing. And he could play any position. And when we played cricket, he could play anything. Get you out, he could hit you for six. It's just like, oh, that's what's successful. It's like you can't be, and like, you can't just be the best person in school. You got to be the best person in the county. I mean, I used to play chess, and I used to be pretty good at chess, but I was never going to be the best in the county because I wasn't patient enough, and I didn't love it enough. And the same with music. I played music, and I still play music, but I was never going to be, I was never going to be like an orchestral professional musician because I didn't want to practice 8 hours a day. And I think it's that thing that you got to find the thing that you would love enough that you want to do it 8 hours a day for free for like 10 years before somebody pays you to do it for 15 hours a day, And the thing that I loved, I eventually loved writing, and I loved watching movies mostly. I thought I was going to watch movies for a living, be a critic or something. And at the same time, I was like, I really liked acting. I really, thought I thought I wanted to be an actor when I was a kid, and I would try and be like, I was in like the local Christmas pantomime at like the theatre, like professional theatre. So, you go and you'd hang out all night. And the grown-ups, you see all the backstage stuff, and the grown-up actors would be doing all their thing, and then you be on stage for 10 minutes, and then you do your thing, and like it's a full theatre full of people, and you go off, and it's sort of intoxicating, the sort of camaraderie of it, and the fun of rehearsal, and working with the director, and the costumes, and I just love that whole world of it, the whole world of sort of like make believe, and sort of the behind the scenes professional machine of it, like the stagehands and the people who built the sets. I found it just was like magical. The whole place was magical. But I wasn't very good at acting, and it was a bit like with the sports. I realized that I was just not very good at it. I would sort of do little films with my friends, and I'd act in them, and I'd watch them back and think, oh my God, I'm not very good at it. When I was doing it, I thought I was being great. And then I'd watch it back and I'm like, oh, I'm really not very good. And at the same time, I was meeting all these actors who were working at the theatre, and a lot of them were like brilliant actors. Like I was just like in awe of them. You know what I mean? Like they were like the coolest people I'd ever met, and they were so talented, and they were doing comedies, because it was a rep theatre, so it was the same group of people would do like 4 shows in the season. So they would do like an Oscar Wilde comedy, they would do like a weird experimental sort of Russian play, then they would do like a Shakespeare, and then they would do like a pantomime. So they would do like all these different roles, and you would see them like be amazing in all of them. But I remember hearing them when they were, sitting down before and after shows, all complaining to each other they couldn't get an audition, and that so-and-so got cast in that. As actors always do, it's like, God, you see that so-and-so got cast in that? I'm way better than he is. Why has he got a walk-on part in the bill? I haven't got a walk-on part in the bill. I can't pay my rent. It's like my parents want me to get a proper job. And I'm like, really? Because you're like the best actor I've ever seen in real life. And they were like, oh, mate, it's so hard. I can't do it. It's like, and I just thought, well, if they can't make ends meet, if they can't get jobs, and these are the best people I'd ever seen in the flesh, like, it's like the best sports person you've ever seen, like in real life, and like they can't even get like a tryout for a local team. You kind of think, well, I am never, ever, ever going to make it on the team if they don't. So it was that point I was like, well, maybe that's not what I should be doing. And at the same time, I was really into painting. I was into writing stories, and working in the theatre. I was working with the director, and I saw what the director did, and like my family had become friends with the director's family. So like my parents knew him at that point. And so, I could just sort of observe what he did and how he talked about it. And that, and he was called Andrew, and he was a really interesting director who had like these really interesting ideas about how to reinterpret like Shakespeare, and how to stage stuff, and what kind of plays it should put on, and why. And I thought, well, maybe that seems to be the thing that I'd be good at, and at the same time, I would always be talking to people about films, and they would, before IMDb, somebody would say, "Oh man, what's her name? What's she been in?" I could give you the actor's name, and I could give you 5 movies they've been in. My mum would ring me from at university. I'd get a knock on my door because we didn't have cell phones at this point. I'd have to go down to the payphone, and my mum was ringing me saying, "I'm watching this film." It's like, what's the film? I can't remember the name of the film. And I say, "Describe the film." She'd be describing the film. I go, "Okay, here's the name of that film." She goes, "What's the name of the woman who does that in the film?" It's like, this is her name. It's like, what has she been in? And I give her like two things she'd been like that. Oh, thank you. And then I go about my day. So, I always had that sort of encyclopedic knowledge of films and just a deep, deep love of them, that it felt like that was the world I wanted to go through. I mean, I didn't come from a place. I mean, I was writing stories and I had things that really interested me, but the world of film wasn't that. Like, I got these stories, I need to find a medium. You know what I mean? I have this stuff bursting out of me, and I need to find a thing. It was much more. I love this arena, and I got to find my own voice in it. And even then, from like the theatre days, it just kind of felt like this is what I need to be in this sort of thing, because if I go and work in a bank for the rest of my life, I'm just going to be miserable.
Yeah. Oh, that feels familiar. I want to follow this out, but I want to go back to something first. Do you think you were self-aware of yourself before you saw yourself on screen, or do you think seeing yourself acting in these things that you made, you suddenly became self-aware of your boundaries as a human being? Does that make sense?
No, I think I've always been in my own head too much, which is why I think I'm not good at acting, because I'm just overthinking things the whole time. Yep. So I'm not sort of losing myself to the moment. And I really admire actors who can do that, who can just sort of react in the moment as if they're another person. I just can't do that. I'm just sort of thinking about, even when I'm writing, like how this person reacts, and then editing it and going back and rethinking it. That's why, I'm better at writing than I am at, being a human being, I guess, but especially acting. I was aware that, I mean, I think it's just from being like at school and not feeling that you fit in. I didn't feel like I fit in the town I was in. I didn't feel like I fit in the school I was in. I felt pretty different all the time anyway. I didn't mind being different. I just felt like there's a different place where there's other people like me. And I guess the theatre, it felt like, this is where I feel a bit more comfortable. So I think everybody has that. People have that with sports, I guess, as well. We're talking about sports, that, when they're in like, even if they're good at like maths, if like, they're sitting in maths class and they're like, I just don't like this. And then when they're sort of like hitting a ball about, they're kind of like, this is where I feel like I'm with my people. And I think it is that struggle to find your people, because your family are obviously your people, but sometimes then you realize they're not. I mean, luckily I grew up and I realized that my family, same kind of people as me, which is nice. But and I realize I'm very, very lucky for that, because a lot of people don't have that. But I think this sort of consciousness of the world, I think I had that very young. I always had a very sort of like old head on young shoulders, I think. I was always very aware that, there was, it wasn't just my experience of the world. There was other experiences of the world going on, and I was just another experience of the world. I sort of realized that very young.
How did that develop for you? Like, was there something that happened where you suddenly, because one of the things that, as a parenthetical, one of the things that I see, talking to people on the show a lot, if not exclusively, I don't like to talk in universals, but it seems almost universal at the very least, is that there is something that pries, if you're going to make something interesting. And I suppose if you make bog standard art, maybe this doesn't happen to you, but if you make something interesting, there's something that pries you apart enough from the world around you that you now have this new ability to look in on it from the outside. It seems like that happened to you. And I'm wondering, was it just something, or is it just how your brain, it could just be how your brain developed. I don't know.
I mean, I don't remember one sort of lightning bolt moment. I think it's probably like an accumulation of little moments. I mean, I think when you're a kid, if all your friends have lives that are very similar to your life, you just feel like that's life, right? Everybody has that life. Everybody has that childhood. And my experience was that, like, my house felt very different from other people's houses, even when I was a kid. My dad worked at home. Everybody else's dads got up in the morning, went out to work, put on a suit. My dad was like, jeans and t-shirt because he's a writer, And my mum would get up and go to work. So automatically it's slightly different. And they we had like art gallery posters on our walls because they were into art, and my dad was the kind of person, because he was a radio writer. We didn't have a lot of money. If you would go past like a skip and it had like a cool looking piece of furniture in it, he would like get the piece of furniture, bring it home, and he would fix it up and paint it, and that would be like our new piece of furniture. Like certainly no other families were doing that I knew. And then I would like, early on when I was a kid, in Harrogate, there's an American base nearby. There's like an NSA facility near Harrogate, which is like has these big golf ball sort of satellite telescopes that look at, because this was in the middle of the Cold War, so they needed to see things coming across the world on the way to if anything was going to come across on the way to America, it was this spy station that would like see things coming from the Soviet Union, I suppose. And there was loads of Americans who lived in a base there, and there was like a whole community. So they had like the facility, and then they had a little mini town, and I think it's still there. And in that mini town, they spent dollars. It was American food. Like the houses, all the architecture looked like an Amblin movie. I mean, you could really go shoot Stranger Things there. It looked like 1980s. It was built in the 80s. It looks like 1980s sort of Marin County. And one of my best friends at school when I was like 4, his dad worked there, but they didn't live on the base. They lived around the corner from me. And my brother was best friends with this guy's brother. So my friend was called Glenn and his brother was called Owen. And we would go to their house and they just had all this American food and all these American rituals. And then like on Halloween, we go to the base with them and we go trick-or-treating. And there was no trick-or-treating in the UK at the time. It was just nobody did it. We do it now, but kind of almost. But at the time we went, and we would just get like bags and bags of candy. And it was all candy that we had no idea what it was. I mean, some of it we'd seen in movies, like Tootsie Rolls and stuff. But like we'd get all this American candy and we're like, what is this? It was like finding sort of like weird gems under a rock or something. And you just, and at that point, you sort of realize there's just all these, in the movies you think, oh, that's another world, but it's far away. You know what I mean? It's like when you watch a film about sort of like, feudal Japan, like, and then you don't think, the great thing about those movies is like, oh, those people are just the same as us, really. But at the same time, it feels very far away. Whereas this was like my best friend who had like, this was his life before he came to the UK. And we traveled a bit, but we hadn't traveled around a lot when I was a kid. So, sort of seeing different people's lives and how different people, experience life, you can just think, oh, it's like my life is very specific. It's like not everybody has this experience of life. My life is, and so I never made the assumption that, everybody else thought the same way I did. And then I very quickly found out after that most people didn't. And then that was fine. So that gave me sort of a confidence to be like, well, this is what I believe. And this is what I'm a vegetarian. I turned vegetarian when I was 11. And, in Yorkshire and, at the time, nobody was vegetarian, And so my parents were like, are you sure? Because if we go out to eat, there's going to be no food for you to eat. And it's like, that's fine. I spent like 10 years just eating sort of cheese sandwiches, basically. But I was very sort of clear of that. That's what I believe and that's what I wanted to do. And so I think I'd always been, I guess my parents would just say that I was sort of like bloody minded and stubborn. But sort of I just had like my view of the world and, which was informed by the rest of the world. But I didn't sort of feel like I had to do that thing because that thing was going on over there. It was always like, well, no, this is the thing I want to do. I want to watch the Ten Commandments. I want to watch the Decalogue. I don't want to watch the other thing. But I wouldn't watch the other thing as well. But this thing over here was like my passion,
Yeah. Okay. What is it in you though that, and again, this could just be the way your brain originally was set up and it just felt pleasurable to follow this out, but that you could resist, because I was the same way, but what was it that you could resist conforming where, I mean, I've been a vegetarian for 20 years or so now. And for most of that time, it was, if I went out to a restaurant, it was pasta primavera, right? Something like that. Like there was not, it's only in the last handful of years where, you've got like actual, and I guess LA is a little more friendly, but like,
no, it's the same the rest of the world. It's like veganism. The cult of veganism has made our lives easier, but we eat a lot less cheese when we go to restaurants because they don't serve vegetarian food anymore. It's all vegan food.
Yeah, exactly. But like, what was it about you where you're like, well, you know what? I am going to have the confidence to follow out, even though it's alienating. I think that's the thing that I'm trying to get at, because like I felt alienated and I had friends, but like it still felt alienating to be me. It still does, now as an adult.
I mean, I think everybody feels that. I think everybody feels that it's alienating to be themselves, but I think most people's sort of tastes are probably quite wide and shallow, whereas mine are quite narrow and deep. You know what I mean? That I get. I mean, maybe it's obsessiveness, or maybe it's just that I just love to follow down a rabbit hole. It's like, I like very weird, complicated music. I also like pop music, but I can't listen to pop music all day, or I'll go insane. Whereas if I play some of the music I really like my wife will hate it because it just like, if I'm playing Aphex really loud all day, it's going to drive people insane because it sounds, some people it just sounds like industrial noise. And I actually literally have vinyl of industrial noise that I will sometimes listen to. But I think, to sort of try and answer your question, that there's, I guess I felt that people had noticed that I was a bit different anyway. And they didn't dislike me for it, but they did sort of slightly treat me differently for it. And maybe that was just but maybe they never thought they were doing that, but that was my sort of feeling of it. And I think, it's almost like if you're going to get punished for the crime, you may as well do the crime. That if they're going to say that I'm different, it's like, well, I may as well relax and be different. And I didn't mind standing out as long as I was comfortable, really. And like, what made me uncomfortable, some of the conformity made me uncomfortable. So like, I never really liked wearing uniform. I mean, I like nice clothes, I like suits, but like at school, I never used to like wearing uniform. But uniform makes some people feel very comfortable because they can blend in. You know what I mean? That they're not conspicuous. But I never liked it, mostly because I found it uncomfortable and I didn't like the look of it. So aesthetically, like I normally have these two things, which is like practicality and aesthetics. The perfect objects are both brilliantly practical and beautiful. Whereas like uniforms seem to be neither practical nor beautiful. So I just didn't want to wear it a lot of the time because for reasons of like, I still don't really understand. They couldn't enforce a uniform code at my school. I think it's because some kids didn't have enough money to buy uniform. And so they had to approximate uniform to have uniform because we lived on the cusp of like good area, bad area. Well, not bad area, just like, a less socioeconomically sort of like privileged area, and and so they couldn't enforce uniform. So most of the time I wouldn't wear uniform at all. I would like the rest of the school would be wearing uniform, and I would be like the only one not wearing uniform. So like you see like our class photo, it's all these people wearing grey jumpers with a tie, and then there's like me wearing like a tracksuit, and it's just like I can look at that now and think, wow, I had a lot of guts to do that. But at the time, it was just like, oh, I don't have to wear a uniform. Great, I won't wear it. It just, I didn't really think twice about it, to be honest. So I've never really been, I mean, I obviously cared what people thought of me, but it never really affected me. And I think at the time, I didn't get picked on for that. I was never really picked on when I was young, no more than anybody else. But I certainly didn't mind sort of being different. And maybe it was like just a vast superiority complex that I thought, well, I'm going to get out of here. It's that classic sort of Hollywood story of like, well, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to be somebody else. So, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you think.
Yeah. Okay. We're towards the end, and I feel like I have an understanding of how your ambition formed. But the thing I'm always curious about is how do you make the leap from, well, I have an ambition. Everyone has some kind of, well, not everyone. It's, again, universals. Most people have ambitions. Not everyone follows those ambitions out, right? What is the leap? What is the, again, cognitive, emotional, I don't know, in you that is going from, oh, this is a nice dream to, I'm actually want to do this and I'm going to take the steps to try to make it a reality? What is the existential jump, I guess? I
mean, I don't think it was a jump, to be honest. I think the answer is probably more boring than that, which is that it whittles down. So quite a lot of people try, right? So quite a lot of people will make a bad short film or try to make a bad short film, right? So I had a lot of friends who liked films, and so a lot of people were using video cameras at home, and me and my friends would make these films, and some of them would get finished, some of them wouldn't. Most of the time, you would start shooting for a couple of hours, and then people are like, "Oh God, this is really boring. I don't want to do it anymore." And then those films would just sort of collapse. So you try and find people who would finish one with you, and so you learn that lesson. You learn like, no, I actually want to finish this. So that's the first thing. Is like some people kind of like, no, this is boring. I don't want to do this. Let's go and like have fun instead. Let's go bowling or something. And I was like, no, I'd rather finish this. I'd rather finish the thing. So I think that's, it's like all of these little kind of like, it's like a tree trunk. You're all on the same tree trunk, then you split. And then I chose to go to university and study film. So I was watching films and writing essays about films and reading like about film history and just general history and social economic theory and cultural theory and semiotic. I was reading all of this kind of like feminist psychoanalytic theory. And so I was learning all this stuff and I really loved it, and everybody who did my course wanted to make movies. Like everybody, we're all there because we all loved film. We want to make movies. And a lot of people did, a lot of people did them and they finished them. And a lot of people then left university wanting to make more. And when I was in university, there was no practical element to what I did. So I didn't go to film school. But when I was at university, I made 2 films on 16mm, which, I spent savings on. So I was kind of like, that sort of set me out, I think, that I was willing to spend all the money that I'd earned when I was at school in my part-time job, which I was working that part-time job to be able to afford to do it. So I'd like amassed a little bit of, not a lot, like, about £1,000 or something, and which was a lot for a teenager to have, but I was not spending it because I wanted to make a film. And so I made a 16mm short film when I was 19 with some friends in my parents' house. And then it took a year to make. We shot it on 16. We cut on a Steenbeck, so we cut it physically cutting film. And I did that like in the summer holidays. So I spent my entire summer holidays at university doing that at like the Leeds School of Film. And I wasn't a member of that. They just let me sort of squat in there because like the editors were all finishing off the graduation films, and the editors sort of took me under their wing because I was just like a kid, and they taught me how to use a Steenbeck, and then I was just cutting my movie and showing it to them. And then, very, very slowly it got finished. And then I made the year after that, I made another one. But like, I think it was just the fact that I didn't give up sort of set me out. That thing of like, no, I'm not going to give up. And, when I graduated, there's some people other people had made short films, and they went off to try and get into the industry. And then a lot of people by this point were like, no, I don't want to make films. And they either did like MAs or PhDs, or they got proper jobs and earned money and got mortgages. But I went to London to try and get into the industry. And it was just that I didn't give up. I just kept trying. And while I was keeping on trying, everybody else I knew just sort of found other paths. And I was like the only one seemingly who either through, I don't know, thought I was good enough, or either that, or was like too stupid to give up. I had like a complete lack of common sense to give up and go and get a proper job. But I just kept on going. And I mean, I was very lucky. I had very supportive parents. I had very supportive friends. And then I found a group of people who wanted, I got an agent when I was in my early 20s. And then I was, getting meetings based on my scripts. I wasn't getting any money, but I was getting sort of feedback, and I was getting to know people. And I felt like I was part of the industry, and I felt like, oh, this is possible. But, I think it was that. I think it was just that it wasn't a moment where it's like, oh, I want to do this. It was a moment of like, oh, I'll try this. Oh, I like this. And my hobby very slowly became like the thing I really like to do. And then it became the only thing I could do.
Yeah. No, I get it. By the way, it's not boring. I'm a Marxian. So, I think it does start with material circumstances, right?
Yeah,
and the material circumstances of just like the physical making of the thing. And the pleasure in doing that then starts you off on this path. And I think
I came out of university because like this was in the era my dad was like writing soap opera. I came out of and I didn't have to pay for university. I still went to university when it was free to go to university. There was no fees to pay. So I came out with no student loan, no debt. And I came out, of university basically sort of like, white male middle class with no debt. And it was still really, really, really hard. But especially at that time, that all was working wildly in my favor to become like a writer director. And so I think, which I wasn't really aware of at the time, but, I could see as I was getting my break, the other people who I was like on a wave with, it was like, oh, we're all kind of the same, we're sort of all kind of nerdy white film guys, and I didn't have to go pay off these debts. I already knew, and I was lucky because like my dad was writer. I already knew it was a job I could do. So even when I was at university, I was writing scripts that I knew I was going to try and send to agents. So I had a plan, and I had a 5-year plan, and then it modified to like a 10-year plan when I came out of university of how I was going to get into it. I wasn't kind of going into the woods blindly, going, oh, okay, I'm going to find a career in here. Did have a plan, and I knew, looking back, I was exceptionally privileged because if I was not any of those things, it was like one of those things was different. If I wasn't white and male and middle class, or it doesn't matter about being middle class, it's about having no debt. I think not having to pay off a debt. It would have been way harder. And it was already incredibly hard. It took me 10 years, which now doesn't seem like a long time. But at the time, it was like 10 years of, not earning a lot of money at all, not being able to buy new shoes when I needed them, because I just really, really wanted this thing to happen. But yeah, so like, the circumstances are very important. And my circumstances meant that I was very lucky.
Jay, thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Culprits came around by I was saying, I've been saying to my wife for weeks now, I'm like, I need to relax at night. I need like a 6 or 8 episode British crime drama. It really I don't know what it is in my head, but like it just perfect timing. It's great. So thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.